Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and everyone can think of a scenario where you thought the conversation was going one way, only to find the momentum stops. Whether it was with a customer, with your child, with a spouse, this is also a common occurrence in sales. We think we have an opportunity, we think we're moving forward with a deal, or we think we're ready to go to market, and then something changes. You don't get a call, someone misses a meeting, a contact becomes non-responsive. Mike and Mike, let's weigh in here. This is a common problem in sales. So what do you have to say about it?
So Jody, when I think of false starts, it really highlights a number of the scenarios that you've just gone through. It's people who are in a sales profession usually are optimistic. They look for the good in each of these scenarios. They are optimistic about their chance to win a deal. So as they go through the various steps that we've discussed on previous podcasts, they highlight the things that are good. And I think many times it's highlighting the things that are good that'll lead you to the point where you miss gaps in the story or gaps in the discussion. And many times it's the missing of those gaps that lead to these false starts, where you think that you're working with the right contact inside an organization, but you realize that they don't have the purchasing power. They don't have the ability to make a decision. They may not even have the ability to influence the decision, or they elevated their position beyond their scope, or they're even just a gatekeeper that is playing an individual role where their focus is to gather as much information from you throughout the sales process before the organization moves forward.
So when I listen to that, I can't help but think about what it looks like from a sales perspective. I think Jody highlighted a couple of good examples of how things sort of missed expectations and things in life in general. And it's kind of funny because life in general is very much about sales, but really a lot of times it's because we have sort of skipped steps in communication, or we've made assumptions about things that we didn't fully understand, and we assumed things were moving forward, but then we discover that painful stage in a lot of encounters that you have with prospects where all of a sudden they go dark on you, and that can be really frustrating. And there's a number of reasons why that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, some of the reasons why that happens is maybe they just don't have anything to share. So you want to be careful about misperceiving that as a negative. I've been involved in scenarios where I've sent communication out, or I've done my follow-up with a customer, with a prospect, and I just haven't heard back. Then you follow up and you don't hear back. And then you follow up again and you don't hear back. Well, before you know it, you start to sound and seem and act and pass on the impression of being desperate. And in one situation, I was working on an account, and it was early on in the relationship that I've created with this person, and we still stay in contact today. We finally got to the point where he called me back and he said, look, Mike, when I have something to share, I'll share it. Up until that point, there really isn't anything else that I can give you. We can have a conversation. I know the questions you're going to ask. I know what kind of update you're looking for. I know you've got people on your end that you need to provide an update to, but I just don't have anything on this end. So it's going to be quiet for a while. And
so were you sending them howdy emails, check-in emails? Hey, just checking in.
It got to the point where that's what I was doing. I mean, and we laugh about it now, but sometimes you feel like you just have to do it. And I mean, we all have bosses that we report to, right? So you've got somebody inside your organization who expects an update on how this deal is moving forward, and you're not able to get an update. Well, you've got to feel comfortable going back to your boss and saying, you know what, right now we're in a holding pattern. Things have stalled for a bit, and that's okay. But be clear about what those next steps are that are going to help either get you out of the holding pattern or be at a point where you can set expectations around when those next steps should occur.
Yeah, I think one of the things too is we'll talk a little bit about things you can do to try and get re-engagement to happen and the way to approach it. And maybe a couple of examples that as buyers and people that receive this communication, some things that maybe don't work so much. But another thing I'm constantly telling our team, one is Mike highlighted a really good point. I don't drive that behavior by hounding everybody for these weekly updates. And I think one of the things that as sales leaders we have to think about is, are we even driving that behavior in our sales team by demanding those updates every week? Or it gets to, this is where I see it, as at month end or quarter end. Hey, I really need to know what's going on because they're trying to report to a CFO. I mean, all this desire, when you think about it, it's our satisfaction of our needs and the things that are important to us and has nothing to do with the client. And if we let that then become conversations that start to come off as being pestering and not a benefit to the client, then at that point, you just sound like every other sales rep trying to get deals closed. But one of the other things I'm always reminding people, and on our team even, I think about, and it happens again at month end and quarter end for their own reasons of wanting to get business booked. But you have to realize that what you're doing may or may not be that important to the person you're communicating with. And they're busy and they've got a lot of things going on. And sometimes you're better off, well, first establishing what the expectations are in the first place, but not being that overzealous follow-up person and just realizing people are busy. And when it's important and if the timing is right, that's usually when people re-engage with you. So it's having that patience not to feel like you have to continuously pepper people with check-in emails and phone calls.
So what's an example of follow-up that isn't checking in?
Okay, so you're asking me for a specific example. So let me think of one that's real that I'm dealing with right now. So I have a large enterprise opportunity that I'm helping somebody with. And what I know about the opportunity is that the timing isn't right because they have their fiscal year coming up and then they've got a sales kickoff meeting coming up after that. And so, first of all, if I didn't know that, I might be wondering why it went dark on me. And I would be nervous that all of a sudden this huge opportunity we have is falling by the wayside. But I have that knowledge, so at least I know what the expectations are. But if I didn't know that, or now because some time has passed, there will be a need to, how do you sort of parachute back in, or how do you emerge some momentum and try and get it back on track? And what I'm doing right now is I'm following, I'm not stalking, but I am following on social media. This person happens to be pretty active on Twitter and in LinkedIn with different various posts. I know what they're working on from a company perspective on the projects. And so if I see some things that are happening where I could add value or comment or help that person through that process, then that's what the email would be about, or the call would be about, to say, hey, I noticed you posted something on the challenges that you're having. Here's a couple thoughts that I had about that. It has nothing to do with the opportunity we're working on, but it's a way to stay engaged in a dialogue. And I have a bunch of those going on right now where it has nothing, the communication I'm having with people that we're going to do business with in the future really has nothing to do with the opportunity, but it has more to do with how can I somehow add value or help them in other things that are the priority right now, knowing that eventually what we're working on will become the priority.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to communicate across the team is it's everybody will be a customer at some point in time. It may not be today. Well, it may not be. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow. Heck, it may not be for a couple of years. And that example before, the guy that I was referring to, his name's Tim. Tim works for a large defense contractor, and we never got the deal done. That was an 8-year sales cycle that just never got done. And the reason it didn't get done is because it wasn't the right time. It wasn't the right place. There were a number of other circumstances, changes that happen inside the organization. But at some point in time, it is going to make sense for that organization to partner with the company that we were a part of before, and a deal will happen. I think
that's right. That deal actually did just happen, didn't it? and that person's like, wow, this magically came together. We had the two Mikes working on that deal for almost 8 years. And look, now that we've got somebody else working the deal, it finally closed. Right.
Well, that was the problem. They got rid of us, and then they were finally able to get the deal done.
They closed $1 million deal. Good for them.
So, and we've got a new member of our team, account executive. He grew up within our organization, started as an intern, promoted from within. And, this is an area where he's struggling. It's just like, how do I get people to respond? How do I continue to stay engaged? And what I've tried to impress upon him is that communication that you're sending out should not be related to the deal. It shouldn't be related to this business relationship that you're trying to pull up. All you're doing is educating them on something that they're also interested in. And it could be related to, in this instance, it's around equal opportunity, some new findings the EEOC put out in the marketplace. That's less about the training that's being delivered and more about increasing awareness and being another resource to this a person in the organization. And that communication is significantly more valuable than, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Just checking in to see how things are going.
Yeah. Jody, do you have salespeople that call you that follow up?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I do get contacted by people mainly because my name is out there so much in the podcasting space. That's where it is. The people will have either editing or this new software or things like that. So I do get contacted about that sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you ever go dark on people?
So the interesting thing about that is that I don't, my granny taught me manners. And so I usually will have a conversation with them. Hey, I checked out your thing. This isn't the right time for me, or this is not something I'm interested in. So I start a conversation with them, but then I also usually just tell them exactly where I'm at. And quite often, well, three things happen usually is I never hear back from them after saying that, or someone will say, this is, thanks for the information. Do you mind if I check back in with you later? Or somebody will just, even though I said no, they'll keep saying, well, but maybe can we just talk about it or something like that? So that's usually how it goes. And the third option, when I say no and people say, well, maybe you didn't know about this, then I'll say, hey, no, thanks. And then if they keep going, then yeah, I would go dark there.
And you've been pushed to your limits of, so you're an awesome buyer because you actually provide feedback. And then, salespeople, we're always trying to make the best use of our time. And we don't want to necessarily beat our heads against the wall. We want to add value and help people where it's appropriate. And I think that's the hardest part when people do go dark is you have to really think about why is it. In some cases, it may not be a fit. You should go dark, or you should just, move on and talk to somebody that does want to talk to you. But I was thinking about, have you ever had the scenario, Jody, where you have the sales rep that doesn't give up and then they start to all of a sudden develop a sense of humor and they start sending emails about being worried about you because you got trampled by hippos or you got your head stuck in a bus door. And they actually, this was a fad that, thank goodness, I think it's finally been eliminated from the sales playbook. But there was about a 6 month to a year period where I was getting those emails every day. And it would be from the sales rep, and it would have some picture of a guy being trampled by some sort of insert whatever the wild animal was, or a guy with his head stuck in a bus. And it would say, look, I'm really worried about you. I've emailed you 47 times. You haven't responded, and I'm worried. So, and then it would show this picture, and it would say, option 1, you've been trampled. Option 2, the timing's not right. Option 3, you're just flat out interested. And I was just wondering if maybe you'd experienced that that follow up.
Yes, I have seen that, but you're right. I haven't seen it in a while. I didn't see it probably near as much as you did, but I have seen those emails. But gosh, it's been months, a year probably since I've got something like that.
Yeah, whoever was training that, I don't know who it was, but I think it finally ran its course. And in sales, I that happens every once in a while where something. You see your team witness that and they go, oh, that's really a funny idea. That's really cool. But you don't realize that when you're calling somebody, you're one of 20 people, 30 people. When I ran a global sales organization, I was literally hearing from, dozens of salespeople on a weekly basis, and probably a half a dozen to a dozen that I was actually interested in what they do. But you had to realize that was one small component of what I need to do every day. So managing a team, bringing in revenue, making wise investments in tools, implementing the tools we already bought, all those things play into the equation. And you can't just assume that I'm sitting around waiting for a cute email to engage in a conversation. So that one drove me nuts. And it's been one of my, in fact, the one thing I would say that did come out of it that was quite positive is we used it in our training content for onboarding. And we said, if you ever do this, it's probably not a good fit for you to be working with us. And we explained why it's not a good idea. But yeah, I was just curious if you'd ever seen that. So I guess the short answer or the short thought about that is that sometimes there is no quick, easy way to re-engage in conversation, and certainly don't do anything that's going to diminish credibility, because that's a quick way to get unfollow me kind of activity.
You've got to play the long game, and if you're looking for the next trick of the trade that's going to get a response, realize there are many other people just like you who are using that same trick of the trade. And the customer, the prospect, the client, whomever you're engaged with can just smell it when they see it. They see that come across and they know what you're doing. They know the trap that you're setting. They know what your objective is. I mean, the thing that's worked for me is just be transparent, be direct, and ask that question. Has something changed? Is there something different that's going on? What's changed? I mean, there's so many different ways that you can go about trying to get that information, including connections and research and engagement with other members of the organization. And remember, you're putting together a painting or putting together a puzzle here where there are multiple pieces that come together to help you put together that strategic deal. Use all of the resources that are available to you and don't settle for tricks like asking if someone was swallowed by a hippopotamus.
Yeah.
Imagine how bad you might feel if you send that email and then find out they were trampled by a hippo.
Right?
Right? That's going to be awkward.
I mean, yeah.
That would be very awkward.
You know what? If I ever get one of those again, I'm going to say that exact thing. I was on safari. It's funny you mentioned the hippo incident. I didn't realize that story got out. I mean,
how did you know?
Yeah. I'm finally back to work this week. I've been out for about 7 months, and my wife's still not doing well. I could have some fun with that, Jody. I'm sorry. If I ever, I don't normally like to do that because I don't like to put negative sales karma into the universe, but that one may be too much for me to handle. I might have to take that one for a trial spin, see what comes of it.
So you two have covered basically two things here. You've talked about false starts and you've talked about stalled starts. And I personally view those differently. When I hear about a false start, then perhaps there was really nothing there. It just felt like it in the beginning, where if it stalls, there really is something there, but for whatever reason, it stalled. And maybe it's still going to happen, but it's not in motion at the moment. How do you two determine if it was just a false start or if there really is something there that happens to be stalled?
Yeah, great question. And my mind was kind of going in another direction here, but I'll kind of tie it to what you're asking. And that's because we've also had some false starts lately where it's not that we were the recipient of the stall, but that we had worked with, and I'm thinking in the last 4 weeks, at least 3 cases where working with founders, talking about how we can help them in their journey and things like that. We're going through that initial discovery process. We actually created the stall, and not a stall in the fact we just stopped calling them and said, hey, good luck getting a hold of us. But I mean, we literally got to the point where we said, it's time to stall, go forward steps. And it was based on really understanding where they were as a business and realizing that if we were going to try and do something that would have a mutual benefit, there were certain things that CEO or that founder needed to do before we could add value from a sales perspective. And so, like, I'll give you this scenario, Jody. Probably one of the most common things that we hear is, hey, I'm a founder. I can sell my product. I don't have time to sell my product. So I think it's time to just get us a couple of salespeople and throw them on the phone and see what happens. Or let's start doing some marketing automation and see what kind of activity comes of it. And before we just jump on board and say, yeah, great, let's just go hire a couple of people, Mike and I go through that process of really understanding, are they ready to do that? And just because a CEO can talk very passionately and articulately about a solution, sometimes people that they already know, they misinterpret that as, hey, I'm ready to go to market. And there have been a few cases most recently where we've had those discovery calls and we've basically come back and said, here's some things I focus on first. And so what we've essentially done is put a stall in place that says you're just not ready yet. And I know, Mike, you had one yesterday too that was kind of in that same vein.
Yeah, no, many times you create an intentional stall, right? And that's what Mike's describing here. Those stalls can be created by the questions you ask when you help to surface that maybe that founder or that organization doesn't really know what they think they know. They may not completely understand who they are, what they want to be, where they want to go. You start asking those tough questions and you realize, if I can't articulate this inside my own organization, how am I going to articulate it out in the market? How am I going to identify somebody who can come in and sell this product with the same passion that I have if I can't clearly communicate what that passion is or have not validated it? I'll use the podcast as an example. We've given pre-release versions of this podcast out to a number of people and have asked for feedback. We've got a bunch of people inside our organization who are saying, oh, it's great, it's awesome, it looks great, don't make any changes. We go outside of our immediate network, the people who have a check associated with our business or a part of our client base. And now we're getting some really direct feedback about, incorporating more stories into the conversation. So I think another thing you've got to be careful with as a founder is be careful who you're asking for feedback on. Jody, I'm sure if you went to your granny and asked her feedback on how well you do as a host of a podcast, she'd probably say,
best host ever.
And, although we think that, Jody, and your granny thinks that, she has some personal bias built in.
I did an A/B test with my 18-year-old and my 20-year-old daughters, thinking that at least one of them would find it remotely interesting. And they couldn't make it through an episode. They said, no, this isn't for me. So, you got to know your market and your audience.
Did anybody come back and say, how the hell do you work with that guy?
No, I didn't have that. I actually, what I did get was, which I now I think this is a really wise thing, is that Jody's getting actually the highest marks of the three of us.
Jody
so
is.
I'm like, hey, the paid talent, at least he's really bringing it home. We just have to aspire to be as conversational as.
What makes you think Jody it wasn't Jody that I was referring to when I said, how the hell do you work with that guy?
Good point. Very good point. But okay, so to bring it back here, because I can digress pretty quickly with my random thinking. But when we talk about the stalls and the readiness and preparedness and what it really means to have a meaningful deal, the stall, for a salesperson, that sounds kind of foreign in that you would want a deal to actually stall. Well, the reason we want it to stall is if it's not a good mutual fit. It's not about selling a product or selling a project or a consulting gig or whatever it is. It's about the outcome that you want to have, which is a very happy client that you've added value for, that will then become a partner longer term, that will rely on you, that'll trust you, that next time they meet somebody, the last CEO I talked to was the result of somebody that I last worked with 8 years ago, that he met the CEO at a wedding. And the guy was a founder, and he said, wow, this is the problem I'm having right now. And I haven't talked to him for 8 years. And he said, I know a guy you should call. And those are the kinds of things you want to put out in the world, where you build that reputation. And if you have that in mind, where you want to find those win-wins and you're willing to say, okay, no, I don't need to push this forward because it's probably not the right time or the right fit. But the selfish reason why you do that is because then it affords you the time to focus on the opportunities where you can add that kind of value. And I think a lot of that comes with, you have to have a little bit of discipline to say no to certain things and say, probably not a great fit right now for either one of us, but I do want to focus on other things. And the things that you focus on where it is a perfect fit, you'll also find that you don't have gaps in communication. You don't have people going dark on you. What you hear more of is, wow, I really like the direction this is headed. What do we need to do next to keep this moving forward? And those are the kinds of opportunities you want to invest your time in. Let's face it, you only have so many hours in the day. And do you want to spend that working on opportunity that you hear client feedback that says, what are the next steps and how do we keep things moving forward? Or do you want to constantly send emails out to people checking in and worrying about them, their hippo crushing? I mean, it's a conscious choice that we all make. But in some cases, we just want to keep casting that wide net, hoping that somebody will bite.
As we wrap up here, I want to get one tip from each of you, because you had said earlier that you might give some things on how we can get re-engagement if this has stalled or if it's a false start, or probably more likely if it's stalled and you just want to get re-engagement. So as we wrap up, let's hear your best advice on how to get re-engagement on a false start or a stall.
For me, when I think about re-engaging, it really comes back to something I mentioned a little bit earlier. How much do I know about the person I'm trying to re-engage with? What kind of trigger, what kind of outreach, what kind of communication can I send that aligns with where I know they are either personally or professionally, or that their organization has gone through? So I try to provide context. I recently saw this and wanted to share it with you. And then after providing that sharing thing, I may ask a question for an update. I may just go silent. I may choose not to ask the question, because people by thetheir nature, or at least I think that people by their nature are aware of the situations that they're in. And if I know when I'm delayed on getting information back to someone, and when I get an email with an update from someone related to something that I'm interested in, many times that provides a trigger or a reminder of, oh, I forgot to do that. So for me, I just it should be a personal outreach related to something that has some context to what I know about that person or what I know about their organization or something they feel value in.
So now, thank you for some time to think about my answer. That took the pressure off of me. One of the things I was thinking about is something that I've done for a long time and that I've suggested this to salespeople where they really have tried the check-ins and the howdies and even doing what Mike was saying, which is really adding value in the communication. And if they're not like Jody, where they feel bad for you for really trying so hard, they still stay dark on you. But one of the things that I think works really well is the professional version of the HIPAA letter, which just says, and I think you touched on it earlier, Mike, which is basically a very brief, simple communication that says we were on this path and we were talking about, and I would highlight the problem we were trying to solve. And for whatever reason, things have stalled. And I just want to know, should I continue to follow up with you? Or if the timing's not right, just basically looking for that update of what's appropriate from their perspective and just let them know I won't continue to hound you, and end it with something like, I really won't continue to bother. I don't want to be that persistent, sort of annoying salesperson. And what I found is that one, if you keep it simple and brief, people will generally reply to that and give you whatever the next step at course of action can be. And it'll give them an opportunity to do what you were saying, Jody, which is right now, here's what I do, and it's just not a great fit. I appreciate the time, have a good life, or whatever the case might be. Or what you might also find, and this happens quite a bit, is they'll give you more context around why it is being delayed or why things are being stalled. And they'll come up with things like, I gave you the example earlier about this large enterprise guy I know he's got his year end coming up. I know he's got his sales convention coming up, and they'll offer those things. They'll say, hey, I'm sorry, I've gone dark on you. In fact, I really am interested in what we're talking about, but the timing wasn't right. And here's why. I have this meeting and I have year end. Well, let's catch up again in October. And it gives you the way forward to then meet them where they are and engage with them in the way that they want to be engaged with. And sometimes what you'll find is that people that are interested in talking to you but that haven't responded, it's just a timing thing. And if you handle it in a professional way, they don't want you to go away. So if you're saying, look, this is the last time I'm going to bother you, usually you'll hear with, hey, no, actually, I do want to talk to you, but October would be a better time. And then you just put that in your calendar and make sure that what you say you're going to do and make sure that follow-up happens. And by doing it that way, then you know where you can meet their needs, and they'll be far more compelled to respond to you because they've asked you to do that in October. So if you do it that way, I think you'll find that they'll respond at that point.
So as Mike was talking and I started daydreaming, I started remembering, I remembered a situation I went into last year. And again, I'm not going to get into the specific details about who the client was, but in 2014, the agreement that they signed came in about 3 weeks late. And they just kind of were on this routine where timing wasn't as important to them as it was to us as an organization. So the following year, we're meeting, we're talking about this renewal, we're talking about some of the growth that's associated with the account, and we're at lunch, and I set the expectation that I need some help. We've got a new CFO inside our organization. She's deeply involved in each of these deals that we have out there. And I'd like to be in a position where I can set the appropriate expectation back inside my organization about what we're doing. And his off-the-cuff response, and we've got a really good relationship, but his off-the-cuff response was, well, I'll match your CFO with my CFO and we can see where they go. And I said, look, it's not about that. It's truly about me being able to set expectations inside the organization. If there's anything you can do to help me out here, I would appreciate it. Ultimately, we got the deal wrapped up about 2 or 3 weeks early. It was usually came around Thanksgiving. The year before, it leaked into December. This time we were able to get it wrapped up at the end of October. And there's a lot of value in being direct and transparent and engaging and taking a personal approach with the people you work with. You can't do that if you take a transaction, internally focused, selfish approach with working with your customer base.
Well, this has been a tremendous episode, Mike and Mike. I don't think this was a false start at all.
Have we done a tremendous before?
That's the first time I've heard it. But I think Jody's just trying to make up for it. So like a little quid pro quo. We said some good things about Jody. Yeah. Jody's about saying good things about us. So Jody, thank you. We're trading. We'll talk about that on another episode.
Yeah, there we go. Maybe that's an episode all in itself. Well, thanks, guys. And if you want to find out more about Catalyst Sale, you can find us at catalystsale.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Catalyst Sale. Thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale podcast.